Welcome to this audio session recording taken at the Agroforestry Show, which was organised in September 2023 as a partnership between the Woodland Trust and the Soil Association. For more session recordings, go to agroforestryshow.com or explore and subscribe to the Agroforestry Show YouTube channel. Enjoy!
So without further ado, I'll hand over to Stephen, who's going to give the first of the three talks.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Bathgate. I work at Forest Research on integration of scientific models and data and decision support systems. And today I'd like to talk to you mainly about the ecological site classification tool, which we use to help with tree species selection and GB conditions. So just moving on. So quick introduction to ecological site classification. It's a decision support tool that determines tree species suitability using climate and soil data, and suitability is related to a measure of tree growth potential, and tree growth in GB conditions is quite often described in terms of yield class, and that's the metres cubed of stem volume produced every year per hectare. ESC is a tool that's based upon a publication from around 2001. It's available online, Bulletin 124, and it probably gives the most detailed explanation of ecological site classification if you're interested. I'll give a very much a summation of how the model works today. Essentially, the tolerance of tree species are described by suitability models, which describe with sort of dose response functions the sensitivity of the model to temperature, droughtiness, exposure indexes, the continentality of the site, the soil moisture and soil nutrient regime. A fundamental aspect to get the best from ecological site classification as a tool is to represent your local site variables accurately, and that's particularly the soil variables, the soil moisture and nutrient regimes. So moving on, and I think it's important before we go too far in describing S to describe what it can't do, and amongst some of those issues are it doesn't deal with biotic issues such as pests and disease. The genetic component is very limited. It's got some information for Sitka spruce and Douglas fir based on UFRO trials, but nothing for anything else. And then coming back to the site data issue again, by default, ESC provides national scale soil data, and that's very, very coarse when it comes to implementation on the ground. And the example you see in the bottom right here is a site in Scotland where, according to the national scale site data, that Sitka spruce and Douglas fir would have achieved a yield class of less than 12, which is poor quality soil, but actually it's a brown earth, it's a very fertile soil, and as a consequence the trees are growing at the upper end of their yield class range of yield class 26. So that highlights the sensitivity of the ESC model to site data. So despite those limitations, we do believe that ESC provides a simple, objective means by assessing the tree species suitability, and an important aspect is it complements rather than replaces professional expertise, local knowledge and other evidence you might have available. So if you don't believe ESC is working for you, you can draw upon those other sources of evidence to back up your planting decisions. ESC is obviously fitted at a national scale, and there'll be local situations that it doesn't represent in some circumstances. I don't know if you can make this out, but this slide describes the more detailed mechanics of ESC. In essence, the main point is that just simply by knowing where you are in the country, we can work out the topographic and climatic factors from background databases, and then there are other models to allow you to input your soil information either from soil type, indicator plants or geology, or a blend of those. The models then generate the suitability outputs. To try and make it a little bit clearer, I put together this slide. So from where you are, according to a grid reference or quick on the map, we know the temperature, we know the exposure index, we know the droughtiness of the site. Hopefully you can collect the soil properties yourself to enter into the system. The models then work on those variables to generate suitability indices for tree species and NVC woodland types. And they're describing suitability outputs to the user and an estimate of the yield class in the case of tree species. Just to say a little bit about the suitability indices and the way they're defined, This is an example of a tree species response function to droughtiness, and we describe the suitability in terms of the easiest way to think about it is as a percentage reduction the more challenging a site becomes for a given species. So if a site is very suitable for a species in the dark green area on that figure, it means that the species will achieve around 75% to 100% of its maximum yield class, and that's described as, say, a very suitable site. And continuing on the traffic light metaphor, a suitable site is about a 50% to 75% achievement of yield class for the species. And then beyond that, we get into the marginal area. In the marginal area, highlighted in orange on that figure, the tree species productivity is probably not enough to justify its application for example, timber objectives, but it might still form woodland habitat, or it might be possible to fertilise it to aid its establishment. Once you get into the red zone, we think it's very risky to use a given species because it might die entirely or have major problems with check for a long period of time. To give you a more visual flavour of what suitability looks like in practice, we've got these images of some sites. So starting on the left, we've got an unsuitable site, that's Sitka spruce in a very exposed position on a poor soil. After 50 years, it's grown to 6 metres tall. So that's not very useful as a timber crop. The second image is a sessile oak stand. It's not growing particularly quickly, 20 metres tall after 130 years, but while it's marginal, it has the advantage that it's providing woodland habitat potential for biodiversity. The top side on the right is a silver birch stand, 16 metres tall after 30 years, yield class 6, that would be regarded as suitable. A productive broadleaf stand offering multi-purpose benefits. And then finally, we've got a hybrid aspen stand in the bottom right, which is very suitable, going at towards the maximum end of the yield class range for that species and achieving 60 metres top height after only 12 years. So using this information, we can appraise stands, or we can appraise landscapes. So to start off with, I'm going to illustrate the landscape scale of forestation potential using the ESC model. So in this map, you're looking at climate data indices on exposure. So these are held in a database in the background of ESC. So for this 400 hectare woodland creation scheme, you can see the exposure indices where the dark green are relatively sheltered sites and the yellow and orange areas are the exposed ridges and hilltops. Similarly, if we combine that with high resolution soil maps, we can see where the richer soils are, and the red soils also in some of the more exposed areas are thin mineral soils, or deep peats are less suitable for most tree species. Combining those with ESC allows the user to get a visualization over the region of interest, where you can see where the high productivity areas are in green. The numbers are estimates of the yield class, so they're quite high in the valleys, where Sitka spruce is achieving around yield class 25. And then in the upper elevated areas with poor soils, we're looking at a yield class of 4. However, for many applications, we maybe want to work at a more site level scale, and that's where a stand level tool exists that you can use with ESC on the web. So simply locating your site, well, we've located our location here today and clicked on the map, so that's in the background fetched all the climate data. We can then use this tool to enter the soil moisture and nutrient regime from a survey of indicator plants or soil types that you conduct. The user, once completed those steps, can then look at the climate trajectory for the site. So this figure shows how the temperature is increasing and the droughtiness is increasing over time. So the bottom left are the present conditions for the site, which would be a warm, dry site, and it's moving with climate change toward being a very warm and very dry site. So that will affect the number of tree species that would be suitable on the site. There are options for the user to adjust the site outputs according to some management that they might perform on the site, and that might range for fertiliser applications or drainage. And there are also means for the user to restrict the output species to species more relevant to their objectives. So ESC has over 62 species within the system at the moment, but there are filters there to allow you to constrain the species list to, for example, native species, the main forestry species we typically use in Britain. In Scotland, there are regulatory constraints over which species can be planted under the Wain Act, so you can filter out the species that aren't legal for planting in Scotland, and we also have some filters for agroforestry at this stage, primarily around tree species that can be used for ammonia capture, but we're working on handling more types of agroforestry as part of the Bioforce project. So this is an example now of the outputs of ESC. So it's very simple. It's got a score from 0 to 1, where 1 is a very suitable site, 0 is a very unsuitable site. And again, we've got this traffic light metaphor where dark green is a very suitable tree species, yellow is a suitable, orange is marginal, red's unsuitable. So you can see if we look at the left-hand column, the most left-hand column, the baseline period from 1980 to 2000, most of the native species are very suitable. And in the effectively low emissions environment under RCP 2.6, that's approximately a bit less than plus 2 degrees centigrade scenario. In fact, most of these species would be suitable apart from downy birch through to the end of the century. However, if we take a more pessimistic view of the world in terms of emissions and look at the extreme RCP 8.5 scenario on the right-hand side, you can see that most of the tree species decline in suitability. Some go from being very suitable to being unsuitable entirely by the end of the period. And I think that one of the key features with ESC is it allows you to see the suitability now and in the future, and that helps you future-proof your decisions. Looking at this at a more national scale, we can look at the future climate with ESC, in this case for pedunculate oak. On the left-hand side is a baseline period representation of suitability. So you can see pedunculate oak is suitable throughout much of south-east England and unsuitable in northwest Scotland. As the climate changes, we can see how the suitability becomes more marginal or unsuitable in the south. And now for some objectives, that might be okay if we just want woodland habitat. But it's very important with ESC to remember that what's output under ESC at the moment are suitability indices based around mean conditions. And we have to recognise that actually the suitability is going to be significantly affected by extreme events and the variation in underlying climate models. To illustrate that, I've drawn this slide from Met Office publications which show the change in summer precipitation towards the end of the century over GB. You can probably draw from this set of figures that there's a high probability of drops in summer precipitation of over 40%, but not in every case. So there are some outlier scenarios where in fact the precipitation increases. So ESC needs to evolve through more sophisticated modelling to be able to handle these changes in model outputs that are being generated as part of the latest Met Office data packages. So to do this, we've been using process-based modelling. I'm not going to get into the intricacies of that. I don't fully understand it myself. Other members of the team are very involved in it, though. And what we're moving toward is a framework like this, where we will still describe the suitability in terms of productivity of a given species. So this is Sitka spruce, which is one of the species that we're at the forefront of our process modelling efforts with. So actually, on the left-hand figure, where we're looking at productive areas, they're much the same as the Sitka spruce range at the moment, where you'll achieve yield class 16 to 30. So in a mean climate sense, the story is much the same, even under a quite high emissions scenario. However, the important aspect of what we're trying to do is show the occurrence of risks and events. And on the right-hand figure, you can see the blue areas are where there's very low risk of a severe drought, for example, whereas towards the eastern parts and south parts of the country, and the red and the green, there are very high risks of severe events, and these green and light orange areas represent locations where the productivity might be impacted by as much as 25 to 50%. So although citrus fruits might be yield class 24, potentially 50% of that volume could be lost due to recurring droughts. Now to just move on to some other FR tools that we're working on. There's a climate matching tool that allows you to take a location in GB and see where you might find an analogue climate in the future. So in this example, I've taken where we are today and projected it into the period towards the end of the century, where we predict that the conditions will be more akin to those in western and central France. We think this is a potentially useful tool for assisted migration and choosing seed origins that might be more adapted to future climate conditions for sites in GB. And it might also give you some insight into the types of pests from those areas that might be a problem here in the future. Another tool that we've been working on is the forest development types. This is built around this model, but with the revision to include the effects of mixtures and or mixed age stands. And this is available as a digital tool or as PDF documents downloadable from the web. We've also taken steps to integrate ESC, woodland carbon code growth models, and grant payment information to provide tools that allow you to access the sort of net income associated with a woodland creation grant. And you might have seen this already in the presentations earlier. ESC is also integrated into ammonia capture tools in collaborative efforts with CH. So to round up, the available resources are those links in the slide. So we've got a test version of the new version of ESC and the legacy version that you can look at. There are information about how to integrate ESC into your own applications in GIS, should you be technically minded and wish to do that. I put in the link to the ammonia capture tool there as well. I think one of the things we're going to hear about today is how ESC has also been integrated within ForestFounder to provide an integrated assessment of site suitability alongside all the other regulatory constraints that might occur across the landscape. So if you've got any feedback, that would be very welcome, and thank you very much for your attention today.
Hi. As I said before, my name is Matthew. I'm from Verna. We're a software company, and we're building apps to help people make land use choices to hopefully get good environmental outcomes. And I'm going to talk to you about and hopefully show you our ForestFounder app, which is about helping to work out where you might be able to put trees, including building on the great work that Stephen's just been talking about. Before I get into the details, just a quick thank you to some of the key organisations that are helping us with this project. So across what Stephen's just spoken about, what I'm going to talk about now, and then what Paul will talk about afterwards, this whole collaborative project is being funded by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. So huge thanks to them, because it simply couldn't happen without that money. And there's a huge number of partner organisations that are helping us in various ways. We've got some of the logos up here of some of the kind of major partners that have been publicly announced, but there's actually quite a few more as well. So a big thank you to all our partners. So what is ForestFounder? I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, and then I'm going to attempt a live demo and show it to you. So there's any number of ways that might go wrong, including the fact that my laptop is not enjoying the heat today, but we will see if we can achieve it. So in creating ForestFounder, we set out to answer the question for people, or at least to help answer the question, where might you be able to put trees? And initially this was for organisations that own very large amounts of land, so both public sector and private sector that might have tens of thousands of hectares and want to understand across those land areas what are their tree planting options. And when we started to dig into this question, including through collaborative work with colleagues here, we realised there's actually quite a lot of different, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of different questions you have to be able to answer to think about whether you might be able to put trees on a piece of land. So there's a sort of, I'm looking at the left of this slide here, there's kind of a hierarchy of questions you've got to ask. There's a really basic one around, is this actually a bit of land that you can put a tree into, or is it a pond or a building? Obviously, if you're looking at a map, you can work that out as a human pretty quickly, but if a computer's looking at a large area of land, it needs an algorithmic way to do that. There's the questions that Stephen and Mike and colleagues at Forest Research are the experts on around biological suitability, so taking into account soil conditions, climate conditions, both now and looking to the future, as Stephen was showing us, as the climate's going to change. Are different species of tree likely to thrive in those locations, or is it actually a bad idea? And then you've got to look at regulatory issues, because you're probably aware there's quite a complex regulatory approval process to go through, which also differs slightly in the different nations of the UK, to get the tick and to be allowed to go ahead with any kind of large-scale planting. And then, of course, finally, there's economic issues. Even if you could go ahead and put trees on that piece of land, are you going to want to, or does it compare less favourably with other things that you might choose to do with it? So we built ForestFounder, which is a piece of software that attempts to run through all those checks and give an instant answer over, in principle, unlimited amounts of land. The largest land area we've used it for a client so far was 2.4 million hectares. The power of this, as I've set out on the right-hand side of the slide, is that it can do this check instantly, and it can do it for any amount of land. But there obviously are limitations. So it's using over 100 different data sets, some of which are taken from the ESC system that Stephen was just talking about. So it's doing pretty much the best job that you can do with a computer. But obviously this can't replace the expertise of a human forester who's got decades of experience in sort of making these nuanced judgments. And it can't replace the detailed knowledge that a landowner might have about their own land. So we're not saying ForestFounder gives you an answer, yes, you should go and plant trees. But where this is helpful is in prioritising and getting an instant guide to prioritising where it's worth then applying that human expertise and doing surveys on the ground and taking all that extra expertise into account. ForestFounder as a product has been around for actually a few years now and has been used to help quite a lot of large landowning organisations, and some of the ones that are public and I'm allowed to talk about are represented on this slide. So we helped National Highways work out how many trees they might be able to plant alongside the A-road and motorway network that they manage to feed into their net zero plan. We've worked with the Ministry of Justice across their actually quite large estates in England, across many facilities, to work out where they might be able to integrate tree planting into their land management strategy. And we also work with DEFRA on the National Food Strategy that came out a couple of years ago to work out where within England might be suitable for tree planting. That was the 2.4 million hectare job. So we know that this can be helpful to people. But what we wanted to do as part of the project that DESNES has funded is open up that capability to people who don't have 20,000 hectares of land and don't want to spend weeks working with us in a project fashion, and instead just give them an app where they can just go online, look at a piece of land and get an instant read on it. And we have built that now, or at least the prototype version of it, and I'm going to see if it works when I plug my laptop in. So this is ForestFounder. It's a prototype. You can't go online and do this yourself yet. You have to have a login, but we're hoping to open it up soon. So basically, I need to navigate to a piece of land. I could use the search functionality on the top right to type in an address or something, but for speed, I will sort of pinch and zoom and try and remind myself, because my geography is terrible, roughly where we are now. I know we're in Swindon. It's just that I'm so bad I can't find Swindon. There we go. Right, so this is, I think, roughly where we are. And you can probably see, as I'm moving my mouse around, it's outlining different bits of land in red. And that's actually the land registry boundaries, because one way that it might be helpful for a user to find a piece of land they want to look at is it's my land, I own it, or it's a piece of land I'm thinking about buying. I've accidentally clicked on it and gone ahead. Just to say, you can also just draw a shape if you want to do it that way. And so now I've clicked on this piece of land and I get an instant traffic light coding as to which areas of it are very unlikely to be suitable for the forestry type I've currently got selected, which is native broadleaf. Those that are actually pretty likely, you can never be sure from a computer program, but they look like a good bet. And sort of amber areas where there's something going on that means we strongly recommend that you check on the ground. And I can open these up to get more information about what these advisory information, what these are. So I can hover over one of the reasons why a bit of land is red here, which is that it's in the priority habitats inventory, and it's highlighting that red area on the right. Equally, I can hover over this yellow area, and it's highlighting down the bottom of the list why that's been classified as something that you might want to look into in more detail. And then, if you want to, you can then export this this map of this particular area and take it off to use in your GIS software, or however you'd like to use it after that. There's all sorts of things you can do that I won't take the time to show you now, like selecting more than one land parcel at once, or drawing pictures. A couple of things I will mention. One is you'll notice that agroforestry is not up here as one of the woodland types you can look for. We're working on including that as part of the project that we're talking about today. So the data that comes from Stephen and Paul's teams will power an agroforestry option up there. But it's not useless for agroforestry now, because these broadleaf and coniferous options still give you a reasonably good read on whether, for example, it would be suitable for broadleaf agroforestry. Obviously, it's not perfect because there's things like different stocking densities. And also just to let you know that in the underpinning database and engine in ForestFounder, it will also spit out potential carbon and biodiversity numbers using the Woodland Carbon Code for carbon and the DEFRA BNG metric for biodiversity net gain. We just don't have that wired up to show you in this front-end interface yet. So that's ForestFounder. I'll go back to what's my last slide before I hand over to Paul. This is a system that is, there we go, that is still under development. And we really want feedback and people to help us make it useful and test it for us. I've put on the left of the slide some of the things I just mentioned that we're going to be adding to the system. We also want to get people to test what I've just shown you and see if it's actually useful to people who are making these kinds of decisions for real. So if anybody would like to get involved, as set out on the right-hand side of the slide, please do get in touch with us. The email at the bottom there is just forestfounder@verna.earth. And it's not, we're not asking you for a lot of time here. Maybe absolute maximum 3 hours, could be less if you don't want to give us 3 hours over 1 or 2 video calls, so you don't have to go anywhere. We will show you this system in more detail, get some of your feedback on it, and as part of that, you will obviously be able to take away your own ForestFounder assessment of your land if you want to look at that, and we'd be delighted to include you in our list of public partners should you want that. And of course, you get the satisfaction of knowing that you've made the thing better. So thanks for taking the time to listen to that. Would love any feedback now or afterwards when we're all going to be over there. And I will now hand over to Paul.
So thank you very much. Thanks for the organisers of this. Anything involving agroforestry is a collaborative venture, and no agroforestry system will work through just one organisation or one sort of individual. And it's been great working with Soil Association, Woodland Trust and Forest Research, and lots of people in the audience to bring some of these tools together. So together with some colleagues, I just want to sort of spend 10-15 minutes describing some of the tools that we've developed over the past few years related to agroforestry. And it's not easy developing tools for agroforestry because there's a wide range of systems, hedgerow systems, shelter belt systems, silvo-arable sort of alley cropping systems, silvopastoral systems. And in the talk, I'm just going to look at sort of 3 broad types of models, sort of fixed yield models that we've used, some dynamic biophysical models we've developed, in particular a model called YIELDSafe, and then some of the bioeconomic models we've developed over time. And also to plug for more information. One of the projects we're involved with is an EU project called Digitaf. There's a website, www.digitaf.eu. And as part of that project, we're a sort of 1 year into the project, we're establishing a sort of permanent sort of database of digital tools related to agroforestry. So if any of you have a tool, do contact me, and we'll see if we can get it onto the website so that people know what tools are available. So over the next sort of 3 years, we'll be developing this website as a sort of a long-term repository of a range of tools. So hopefully that will be a long-term resource. So there's a number of ways that we can sort of model the growth of trees. And Stephen's been talking about the sort of ecological site classification that will identify a tree species and give you a yield class for a particular tree species, which was traditionally based on how many sort of cubic meters of timber it would produce per year at its sort of maximum sort of growth rate. You can then use that information to go to the woodland sort of carbon code to sort of get the profiles of sort of carbon sequestration over time. So it's a sort of fixed model, assuming this tree density with this yield class in this sort of location. This is how we would anticipate the trees growing over time. So that can be an effective tool, for instance, in terms of sort of predicting sort of carbon sequestration rates. When we start moving on to agroforestry, things sort of start getting a little bit more complicated. Trees are at different spaces. You've got also your agricultural system to consider as well. So over a number of European Union projects, in fact, going back to sort of 2005 originally, working with João Palma, who's from Portugal, who's in the audience today, and Wageningen University, we developed a sort of spreadsheet-based tool, so it's sort of flexible, called YIELDSafe, which is a relatively simple model to predict on a daily time step basis the growth of trees for a particular location for given sort of climate and soil inputs, and also the growth of crops. So the sorts of things that we can do there, if we've got the sort of daily weather data, we can predict the yield or the growth of the trees over time at a particular spacing. And there on the bottom right-hand graph, we can sort of predict, in this case for sort of poplar at a sort of 156 trees per hectare, how eventually the crop yield would decline in that situation where you had only got 10-metre alleys. And we sort of calibrated those particular models using experimental data from a range of sites at Cranfield, at Leeds, and also at the Royal Agricultural University site at Cirencester. And for a piece of sort of woodland trust work recently, we've been using those sort of models to sort of predict the sort of carbon sequestration rates of agroforestry systems over time, using the sort of destructive harvest and seeing how that matches with the particular results. So we've got measures of tree performance on a daily basis over a tree rotation, and the model on the basis of the light and water use will also predict how the relative yield of the crops will change with time. So in this particular system, you might be putting in arable crops for the first few years and then move to a grass understory. We've done the same sort of thing with a silver pasture system, and in a piece of work recently for the Woodland Trust, we've taken data from the Glensock silvopastoral system. This is with larch up in near Aberdeen. Again, sort of physical harvest of the trees was taken, measurements of soil carbon, measures of root sort of biomass, and again with estimates then of the sort of cumulative carbon sequestration over time or on an annual basis. And again, the model predicting for that particular sort of scenario how we would predict the annual yield of grass would decline in that case as the trees mature. There's options for thinning out the trees or pruning the trees within the model. So we've used that sort of spreadsheet, relatively sort of simple sort of model to bring together the disciplines of agriculture and forestry within a sort of combined package. The next thing then is once you've got that sort of data, we can then start moving on to more of a sort of financial analysis. And I guess the first thing sort of to highlight, there are two sort of broad ways of doing sort of financial sort of analysis. One is financial analysis from the perspective of the farmer or the landowner, and then there's what we call an economic analysis, where you will take into account some of the wider societal values, where you're looking at the value of the system from a governmental, societal perspective. And I'll cover both of those. So we've got the yield-safe model to get the sort of biophysical yields, and we developed an economic model called FARMSafe to start doing some of the sort of financial analysis. And working through an example, what we're doing here in all sort of cases, we're looking at three systems: the basic sort of agricultural system, in this case an arable system, a sort of forestry tree-only system, in this case it was widely spaced poplar, or in this case a silvo-arable system. This is 156 stems per hectare of poplar with arable cropping for the sort of first 10 years. So we've got the biophysical sort of data, we've got predicted yields of the arable crops over time, predicted yields from the agroforestry system, and predicted yields from the tree system. So in this particular system, because the forest tree-only system is a wide spacing, the actual growth of the trees by the end of the rotation in the silvo-arable and the tree-only system is similar. So we've got the biophysical data, and any economic model starts from that sort of basis. We then add the financial parameters. Coming from an agricultural background, if I want to know the profitability of any farming system, I can go to a management notebook and get values. Finding values for timber is a whole different ball game, I've found, and very difficult to sort of find those values. We've got a red line here in terms of what we used in some of the economic analysis that we completed back in 2018. But a useful source of information potentially for timber values is the Grown in Britain website, which gives the value of timber at different sort of volumes of timber. And I've plotted the sort of current data from that site for poplar. So it's the same sort of relationship. As the timber sort of gets larger in size, as standing timber there, it gets more valuable. We then need financial value on sort of costs. So we sort of need to collate that together. And then in sort of a spreadsheet environment, we then start developing those sort of cash flows of how the revenue and the costs of the different systems compare over time. So the red line there is the arable system, a sort of steady sort of level of sort of profitability. The forestry system, this includes the value of the sort of standing trees. In those first years, this is all without grants, sort of negative, but as the trees increase in value, eventually that starts to increase in value, and the green line, in this case, is a silvo-arable system. We then put a value of the time of money over time, so we need to discount that, and the graph on the right shows a discount rate of 4%, and then we can work out the net present value of a particular system over the 30 years. So that allows us to give a sort of financial analysis based on the assumptions that we've done. Then I mentioned at the sort of a bit earlier, we can also look at an analysis from a governmental perspective. So the government has ideas of what the value of carbon is. It has an idea of the pollution cost of sort of nitrate leaching into sort of groundwater. So we can build on these biophysical and financial models by starting to include some of the environmental values. So greenhouse gas emissions, soil loss, nitrogen leaching, phosphorus loss. So in each of these systems, we then sort of quantify what those gains and losses might be. So you get physical variables. And then in the bottom right hand, there's a range of assumptions that you can sort of draw down, that there is sort of a governmental sort of value for sort of economic analysis of what the price of carbon dioxide emissions might be, or nitrogen or phosphorus or soil loss. So looking at this sort of graph, in this sort of particular system that we were looking at with poplar, continuing arable farming would be the most profitable thing. Silver arable would be less sort of profitable, and the tree-only system would be even less profitable. But if we start to include the cost of CO2 emissions from a societal perspective and the benefits of carbon sequestration from a societal perspective, then the woodland and the silver arable systems start becoming more attractive. So if you're an individual, it's a financial perspective that's probably of most interest, but government and some public bodies, it's this societal perspective that's key. And on the basis of this, government bodies might provide sort of support for particular systems. So briefly then to outline, we've got a YIELDSafe model that's a sort of biophysical model for a range of agroforestry systems, and we can demonstrate that to you at the end of this session. We've got also an economic sort of toolkit called FARMSafe that allows us to look at these things from either a financial or a societal perspective. So thanks very much. And as sort of Matthew says, all of these things is from a range of sponsorships, and it's great news today to hear that we have access as universities back to EU funding and the ability now going forward to potentially start leading EU projects again. So that's a good news story for today. Thank you, Mike.
Hi everybody, just peeled myself off the chair there, so hot, isn't it? Okay, so I've just been given a couple of minutes to promote or tell you about another project that Forest Research are working on in collaboration with Cranfield University and the University of Reading. This is an expanding agroforestry focus. It's funded under the Nature for Climate Fund recent round of funding to research. It's supporting the sort of England tree planting plan and also woodland expansion more generally to try and bring some evidence together for supporting those programs. Okay, it's got 2.5 years funding. It's the subject of the research. We have sort of 3 tasks we're looking at. A lot of the effort is going into evidence reviews, bringing together information, and repackaging it and reorganizing it and providing it in a way that's useful for the stakeholder or the end user. We've got a small piece of work which is field research based on pre-identified knowledge gaps. And thirdly, the third task is to identify or bring together a UK trial network. So this is agroforestry sites which are suitable for sort of study and providing hard data on how those systems are operating and to answer a whole range of questions about agroforestry systems. And yeah, so that's the third task. Okay, so it's England focused, but we're learning from right across the country, UK, and our steering group are DEFRA customers. Okay, but this is quite an interesting project because unlike many of the others that went in and under this funding stream, we actually started talking to our customers, our stakeholder group, in drawing the whole proposal together and said, well, what do you want us to do? What do you want us to bid for out of this funding pot? And so we worked with a range of policy and practitioner stakeholders working in agroforestry to say, what do you want us to do? They have said, let's have some evidence reviews. Let's please bring information together in a way we want that information. These are the sort of topics that we feel there's no evidence for out there. Could you do the research on those? And yes, please, could we have this sort of repository of information about demonstration sites where we can point people to and say these are really good examples, or we can learn from through other research effort. So that it was a quite interesting project in that it was really co-designed and co-created right from the very start before we actually got the money. Okay, so for this first task then, for task one, which is these evidence reviews, they are very closely co-created with our wide stakeholder group. We go through setting the question that they want answering very carefully and clearly with the group. We then draw some evidence together and say, are we going in the right direction? And then continuing with the research and then working out what is the output and what format do they want that information in. So it's a very closely designed set of evidence reviews. And we've been working on ecosystem services and benefits of agroforestry. We've been working on species and silviculture of agroforestry tree species. We're supporting some regulation questions and issues through another case study, and we're also looking at carbon abatement sort of data as well. So that's been quite a big part of the project. And all the outputs are then really tailored to answering the questions that our stakeholder group want, and that all probably feed into sort of policy and grants, underpin those sort of grant decision and grant giving decisions that happen in the future. The second task then is the sort of field-based work. We've got a piece of work focusing on carbon balances for agroforestry systems. So above and below ground carbon, greenhouse gas emissions are being quantified. Soil carbon stocks and fluxes are particularly important. And we're focusing on data poor land management types. So here we're looking at silvipastoral agroforestry systems. Another piece of the evidence gathering work, or the field-based work, is looking at conservation priority species in agroforestry. That was a real knowledge gap. We knew quite a lot about sort of broader biodiversity benefits, but not so much about direct impacts on protected species. So we're looking at what's the impacts and the benefits for protected species of putting trees into agricultural landscape. So we're doing the winners and losers type analysis, which will help sort of when you come to evaluate the benefits of putting trees in landscapes. And then another more detailed sort of piece of work is looking at the niches or the habitats provided for protected species in dairy farm settings, in intensive dairy farm settings. When you put trees in the landscape, what niches and habitats created, because that was another kind of gap in the knowledge. And then does that come up weirdly? Yes, it has come up very strangely. I don't know why that's reformatted. This is task 3 anyway. It's the UK trial network task. So lots of work going on, lots of people active in this area, lots of practitioners doing really interesting things and trying them out. We would like to get those mapped out into a big database that everybody can see and access to gain knowledge, so exemplar sites to go and look at, places where we can go and research and answer sort of key questions. So that's another task for us, is to try and just bring all that knowledge together in one place and make it accessible to everybody. And from that, we can then start saying, well, okay, we're starting to learn about these questions. What else do we need to research and learn about in the next few years where the knowledge gaps are? And I've got a couple of my colleagues are in the audience. I think they're going to run around with the clipboards and start asking people if you've got really nice agroforestry sites that you're working on that we could add into our database. Please, could you give them your details? Okay, that's me.
So Kaiser and Imogen are at the back. Please say them if you have a site you would like us to come and do research at, or you would like some information, please talk to them and give us your details. We've now got a short period for Q&A from you, the audience. Our intention is then we have the opportunity for you to come and talk to the experts and look at the tools. So Cranfield will be seated at the table to my left. ForestFounder will be seated in this corner, as will Forest Research with the ESC tool. So part of our Q&A is come and talk to us afterwards. You can look at your own field or whatever you would like to do, come and have a one-to-one. But for now, Q&A. Any questions from the floor?
Hi, Gareth Phillips, Head of Forestry Development with Scottish Forestry. Since making the changes to our agroforestry option in Scotland, we've seen a sort of big uptick in interest in fruit trees more than anything else in agroforestry systems, in-field agroforestry systems. Now, appreciating that there's a lot of complexity there, I'm just wondering if there's any intention to include fruit trees in your decision support systems.
Yeah, under the base project, no, but under the agroforestry project, yes. So it will come. Realistically, the time frame is going to be 12 to 18 months before it's embedded in the tools. And it's obtaining the data is the really difficult bit, you know? And so we need to partner with people that have data. So if you know people who are interested and have data, let's have a conversation. Gentleman here.
Just to follow up on that, in terms of the YIELDSafe model, we did do a project probably about 10, 15 years ago with Heineken that was sort of researching into areas that other beers didn't sort of would want to look at. And they own various sort of cider orchards facilities in sort of Hereford. And we looked at sort of agroforestry systems for cider orchards in Hereford. So some of that is around.
They've got an experimental broadleaf woodland in Oxfordshire where they're pumping CO2 into the atmosphere to replicate the conditions like 50 years from now. One of the things I found in one of their papers, which was like buried deep in the paper, was that they found a significant increase in biomass of the foliage. But that I haven't seen that sort of mentioned today, and I wonder, is that going to have an impact on like drought resilience? Is that something which is factored into the models? Like,
so Birmingham University and Rob McKenzie's group have this carbon dioxide enrichment project. So there's some initial sort of results coming out there showing the sort of the scale of the increase in photosynthesis and biomass sort of production. And we recently at the Farm Woodland Forum meeting used those numbers. Put them into the YIELDSafe model to make sort of predictions of how the agroforestry systems at Loch Gore in Northern Ireland would change over time. So, in fact, the key climate change effect in a wet location like Northern Ireland is the carbon dioxide enrichment effect tends to be, in that particular case, be greater than the temperature and the rainfall effects.
Thanks, Paul. Lady there.
Thank you. Hi, I'm from Dartmoor National Park, and one of the many challenges of getting trees in the ground or enabling natural regeneration, is around archaeology and the landscape character assessments of the protected area. And I was just wondering if any of the models so far incorporate any of those, because it's something we often come up against once we've identified an area that might be good.
So in ForestFounder, we incorporate as many concerns as we can that are part of the checks that you would do. And basically, what we can and can't do is limited by where there's data available. So, for example, we do look at things like scheduled monuments and issues like that where there is good data available nationally. I believe, I don't know if anyone here is able to confirm from FC, that the Forestry Commission is currently doing a project to open up historical environment records and make them into a nationally available data set. The moment that happens, we'll put it straight in ForestFounder.
Sorry, apologies, I came to this quite late, and I'm putting this question to the whole audience. Digital tools, it is all about the base data, but they can at times, with a lot of industries, be like apps on phones. Is there a place that we can go to where there is independent advice on which are the best tools to go for our particular situations? So
potentially over that's sort of one of the aims of this Digitaf project at a European scale, to give a sort of one-stop shop for the digital tools that are being used in sort of agroforestry sort of systems across Europe. and some of them are phone apps. So there will be some phone apps on that website. So that might be one sort of port of entry.
Final question.
Yeah, I just want to follow on from that. Elena Vangelova from Forest Research. So what is the potential? You mentioned about the European digital hub for putting all this on as a shop for people to use. But what is the opportunity for YIELDSafe to be incorporated in the Woodland Carbon Code to fill this gap about agroforestry modeling above ground? And we've just been hearing in the previous talks about the agroforestry carbon code. And can that your model not help there and be incorporated into the whole Woodland Carbon Code? Or it's been already discussed?
So that's one of the aims of the Bioforce project that sort of Matthew is leading, is to bring the understanding from the YIELDSafe model and integrating it with the sort of forestry research woodland carbon code models. So that we try and get the synergies between them.
We hope to improve the numbers that are available. Whether there's my take on the talk this morning was there's not really an economic market to have a separate standard for agroforestry because the pounds and pence don't stack up. Yeah, but we can incorporate it in terms of evidence.
Yeah, and in terms of It's my opinion that increasingly farm businesses will need to demonstrate how close to net zero they are, so appropriate tools at a sort of farm business level to understand the sequestration of your hedgerows, your grassland, your copse, your scattered trees will all become important in that space.
And the biodiversity benefits as well as another route to monetize societal benefits.
Okay. Do you still have a question? And you can come and chat to us in person.
Just a question for the ESC tool, the ESC tool. You mentioned moving towards climate change toward the future, trying to use biophysical models, and there's a big leap to move into that direction. I was wondering, as far as I understand, the ESC model has 4 or 5 variables of forest classification. I was wondering if you could, in this intermediate stage, while you don't have the biophysical models working, which is going to be a big step, I was wondering if you are planning to use bioclimatic variables, which is about 20 or 30 variables, which could be played for the more seasonal aspects of the suitability of tree species, and maybe an interesting, not so big step, and it's easily available, and Copernicus has all the daily data sets to make these data sets, bioclimatic variables data sets, daily, weekly, monthly, whatever.
Yeah, thank you for that. The short answer, yes, that would be really interesting if we could do that as an intermediate step. Some of the work that we're doing on the process modelling side will also give us the opportunity to integrate more climate data and also like the CO2 response into the predictions as well. But yes, for some species that we don't have the process models, that intermediate step would be very useful. I'd like to talk to you more about that, actually.
Yeah, currently our climate responsive modelling works for two productive conifers and a generic broadleaf. But in actual fact, for a lot of the applications we need, a generic broadleaf is going to be good enough. Because what you're trying to do is answer the unanswerable, which is it going to be all right in 40, 60 years under different climate scenarios? So long as it's a fit for purpose for that question, you can go with a reasonably well orchestrated process-based model. We can chat. Okay, thank you very much. If you'd like to come and talk to anybody about their tools and have a play, please do.
Thank you for listening. We'd like to thank our lead sponsor, Sainsbury's, and our other major sponsors, Farmers Weekly Transition, Forestry Commission, and Till Hill, and all the attendees for making this show such an overwhelming success. To get advice and support for your agroforestry project, either visit woodlandtrust.org.uk/plant or soilassociation.org/agroforestry.